Hello, Sooner Nation. Welcome to the latest episode of the Oklahoma Drill for Sooner fans, OU Insider subscribers, Cincinnati, Ohio frequenters, fanatics, Dylan Gabriel enthusiasts, and anybody else that fits into that category. My name is Jesse Crittenden, and of course, I am alongside my co-host, Brian Clinton. Brian, sir, it is Wednesday at 12:45 p.m. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing good. You forgot to throw in our biggest audience. We got the Jesse Crittenden groupies that are out there that just have to check in, man.
Well, look, my groupies, they know where to find me. Okay, my fans, my adoring fans, and I have thousands of them. They know how to find me. I know who you are. But I appreciate you giving them a shout out. Brian, we are here this is episode 3 of the Oklahoma Drill, and we are here to talk a little bit about, we're going to recap just for a little bit about OU Tulsa. OU won that game 66-17. We're going to talk a little bit about things that have happened throughout the week, from the press conferences, media availabilities, player interviews, all those fun things. We'll talk about OU's game with Cincinnati this weekend to kick off Big 12 play. And, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the Big 12. But first, we're going to start with our first segment. Again, these segments, we're trying to figure them out, folks. We're trying to figure out the names for these. If anybody has any suggestions for any of these segment names, throw them in the comments on our YouTube video. We're going to go with Wednesday Wrap-Up, where we talk about the previous week's game. Brian, as I mentioned earlier, OU won that game 66-17. You were on the field, did some really cool video stuff for subscribers at OU Insider and on our OU Insider YouTube channel. But Brian, what was your overall takeaway from that 49-point win?
I was really impressed with Dylan Gabriel again. I think that's been my biggest takeaway from he was aggressive downfield. The one interception that he threw, he was being hit as he let the ball go, but he's been just so efficient. I didn't realize that he was second in the country behind Caleb Williams in passing efficiency this year right now. He's been fantastic, and he just added again to what he's done. So the offense looks really, really good through the air. The running game still concerns me a bit, and I think it's probably just a matter of getting some of the running backs going. But I mean, you can't really have too many. You can't really have too many complaints. They had 5 interceptions. They held Tulsa to 17 points, and they outscored them by, as you said, almost 50 points. So, really good win for the Sooners. I'm excited to put the narrative that they haven't played anybody behind them, though. Even though I believe SMU is a really good football team, I'm ready for Big 12 play.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to give a few more stats on how good Dylan Gabriel has been. I mean, leads the country in completion percentage at nearly 83, completing nearly 83% of his passes. I mean, he's just simply been spectacular. He leads the Big 12. You mentioned he's second in passing efficiency nationally. Obviously, he's first in the Big 12. I think he's 6th in the country nationally in yards per attempt. I mean, to have a 12 touchdown to 1 interception ratio, Dylan Gabriel's simply been incredible. And it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the quality of the opponents, especially if you're looking. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. But doing this against any opponents is really impressive. I mean, look at across the rest of the college football landscape. Look at other Power 5 quarterbacks. There just aren't very many guys right now that are doing what Dylan Gabriel has done, and there's not a ton of teams out there that have played stiffer competition than Oklahoma. And if you look at last year, where Dylan Gabriel was good in non-conference play, but just wasn't playing at this level. Ryan, you mentioned the running backs. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That is something I definitely want to get to. But to finish kind of recapping that game, the defense had 5 interceptions, couple of lapses in coverage that led to Tulsa touchdowns, but otherwise hard to complain too much. I mean, held Tulsa to 217 passing yards, 75 rushing yards overall. Sorry, that's an appearance from my brother's cat here. He's very, very curious. 75 rushing yards. OU's rushing defense again has just been spectacular through 3 weeks. Brian, what stood out to you about the defense as a whole?
Danny Stutzman's a freak. Is the first thing. He's well on his way to being on that Big 12 ballot, although he didn't make the cut on the preseason, which I still is inexplicable to me. But
It is.
I'm really impressed with just again how prepared, I guess would be the best word, that the defense looks. I mean, outside of that, outside of those two drives, Oklahoma looked really good from beginning to end in this game again, defensively. And, you had Justin Harrington out, and you had Desan McCullough, who we thought was going to play. He was in warmups and all that, and he ended up not going. So you had some other guys step in, and it just, that competitive depth showed up again. Like it just shows that they've got some guys in the waiting that can do things like Brent wants them to. And I think what you have to take away from that is, attrition is going to strike. It happens to every team in the country. And, there's a little bit of luck involved for the better teams that, you stay healthy when you can, but if you don't, do you have the depth to back it up? And I think Oklahoma's showing that they have some depth, at least to back up their key positions.
Yeah, you mentioned that cheetah position with Harrington and McCullough. I mean, with both of them out, who stepped in at the cheetah position for Oklahoma? It's Peyton Bowen. It's true freshman Peyton Bowen, who had a couple of freshman mistakes, I think, but otherwise playing the cheetah position in Brent Venables' defense, it's just really hard to do. But he played a ton of snaps there through 3 weeks. Brian, Peyton Bowen is 6th on the team in snaps. I mean, I was saying during the preseason, I thought he was going to have a huge role. I don't even know if I expected quite this level this early. So I think he's just been really impressive. And yeah, you mentioned Danny Stutzman there, 30 tackles through 3 weeks, leads the team, I believe, in tackles for loss, 4.5. He really has he's taken his game to another level. But we've hit on a couple of things there, Brian, that I think we need to kind of touch on in this next segment. That's again tentatively called "What's Happening Now." By week 5, it's just like college football teams, right? Yeah. This is the Oklahoma drill. Like college football teams, you got to find a groove.
We're still working out the offensive line issues. This is just part of it.
That's right. And unfortunately, I am not nearly as efficient right now as a quarterback of this podcast as Dillon Gabriel has been on the field, but you can't hold that too much against me. Brian, this week's these press conferences and player interviews have been pretty interesting. I think the first thing to talk about, you touched on it earlier, is the running back situation. And I think we talked about this last week, but it is continuing to be really interesting. It's not about sounding the alarm, but it is really interesting. And I asked Jeff Lebby on Monday, now that we're in conference play, what is that room? How does it shake out? Because I think the main balance here that they're trying to find is riding the hot hand, which is what Jeff Lebby said going into week 1, while also trying to get everybody opportunities on the field. And why it's so interesting is that Tulsa game, Tobey Walker had been your best running back through 2 weeks. He sees 6 snaps on Saturday. Didn't see a carry. I think Marcus Major saw 5 snaps. Didn't see a carry. Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk got all the work. I think OU fans were looking forward to that. Javonte Barnes had a couple of decent runs, but, I think otherwise the two of them, there hasn't really been a rhythm there. OU's averaging 4.3 yards per carry through 3 weeks, which is good. But last year they averaged 5.5 yards per carry in non-conference play. That is a significant difference. And again, when you're looking at trying to get these 4 guys involved and how do you get them all involved while establishing a rhythm, there just doesn't look to be any rhythm in that running back room right now, Brian.
Yeah. And I think part of it, I don't remember if it was the answer to your question or somebody else's, but Lebby mentioned that those guys are still getting up to speed. They're still getting up to game speed. And I think there's probably some truth to that with Barnes and Sawchuk. But the hot hand comment, like you just said from the beginning, it didn't seem that was the case. It kind of seems like this team knows that they're going to have to turn to Sawchuk and Barnes at some point, because those are your home run hitters. Those are your guys that have that extra step. And I think Marcus Major to an extent has that as well, but he's had such an extensive injury history that, you just have to be prepared for him not to be there down the stretch. So Um, I'm interested to see how they handle some of this stuff as the playbook continues to open up. Obviously, things have been very vanilla. We've talked about that. But we've pretty much beaten the horse dead on that or on the boards. And I think that at some point you have to quit using that as the excuse or as the explanation. And I think that's now. You're about to face a really good defensive line, a very good defensive team in Cincinnati, and I think that with everything on the table now, with Big 12 play starting, and with that Big 12 record starting on the road, now is the time to see some more consistency out of that running back room.
And here's that other, to kind of add to that, Brian. The other dilemma here too, I think, is that Dillon Gabriel's slinging the ball around right now.
Oh, yeah.
And when you go into this weekend at Cincinnati, like you mentioned, that Cincinnati front seven is pretty good. They have 10 sacks on the year. I think they're top 25 in tackles for loss. But they're vulnerable through the air. And Dillon Gabriel has been slinging the ball around, but Jeff Levy's offenses historically run the ball a lot. I mean, last year OU ran the ball 56% of the time, I believe. So again, running more than they pass. So where is that? Is there going to be friction there where Dillon Gabriel, maybe you should rely on that passing game a little bit more, but the more you rely on that passing game, the less opportunities there are for the running back room to find a rhythm. Plus, I agree with you. I think Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes are the two best running backs on this team. However, neither of them have found a groove. Tawi Walker looked really good the first 2 weeks. Again, it's not about concern. It's not about saying, oh my gosh, this is a horrible problem. But I do think it is kind of an interesting thing to look at. And that's what makes this weekend really interesting because, they came out against Tulsa 22 passing attempts to 13 rushing attempts by halftime. They put the ball in Dillon Gabriel's hands, but they need to are they going to do that this weekend? But they also need to find a rhythm in that backfield. So it's a weird dynamic. It's an interesting dynamic. The other thing, Brian, I mean, you mentioned there, kind of the front seven of Cincinnati. Brent Venables talked about it in his press conference on Tuesday that this is going to be a battle of the line of scrimmage. And I really think that means both ways because you look at OU's rushing defense, which has been fantastic through 3 weeks, top 15 nationally in rushing defense. This Cincinnati offense is top 10 in rushing offense. And even on the flip side of it, OU's offensive line's only given up 1 sack this year. But again, that Cincinnati defensive front, they have 10 sacks on the year. So all that being said, we'll talk a little bit more about Cincinnati, but when you take all of that into context, this offensive line group again through 3 weeks has been not a source of concern necessarily, but does it feel like they're still trying to figure things out on that offensive line?
It's definitely a point of contention for the fan base. And I think the reason why is when you look at what Oklahoma's done in the past, whenever they've been really good offensively, it's been because they can bully you up front and run the football down your throat as much as they want. They can just call the same play over and over again. And you can't stop it because you're that good up front. And I do think that this unit has the potential to be that. They've been a little bit inconsistent. You've had some guys like Savion Byrd struggle at times, and you've got some guys like Troy Everett that are coming in behind him, and Caden Green, that are coming in behind him and helping level things out. But I really do think a lot of it just has to do with you haven't. My dad always used to say, we don't know what the offensive line looks like until the Texas game. That's always, and that I think that's the truth, because it does seem like as the season progresses, Bill Bedenbaugh's group gets better. And that's been the case since he's been at Oklahoma. So I would say, I wouldn't necessarily call it concern. Obviously, they've kept Dillon Gabriel really, really clean. And that kind of goes into, I saw this stat on PFF. Dillon Gabriel's completion percentage when he's under pressure this year is 83.3%. Last year, for a total, it was 34.5%. So if that's,
I didn't see that.
If that is because of his confidence in the offensive line, if that's just because he's seeing things better, either way, the offense has been really efficient passing the ball. And I think that the offensive line does deserve some credit for that because they've been able to keep him clean.
Yeah, that's a really good stat. I'm glad you threw that in there. That is just a monstrous difference in throwing under pressure. Now, obviously, we've still got a lot of the season left to go, but
Mm-hmm.
again, 3 weeks is a decent sample size. It doesn't really matter what your competition is. It's a decent sample
25,
size.
yeah, 25%
Yeah,
of the season's over. So
yeah, yeah. So I think the other thing that's noteworthy to mention when you look at the defense, Brent Venables um, talked about injury, injury updates, on Tuesday. Basically said he was hopeful for guys like Savion Byrd and R. Mason Thomas and Josiah Wagner. OU is going to get Desan McCullough back. On Saturday, but it's Reggie Pearson is hopeful. Is he going to be available on Saturday? Desan McCullough will be back, but Justin Harrington, Brian, there's a lot of stuff out there right now, but I can tell you the summation of all of it, it doesn't sound good.
yeah,
It doesn't sound good at all. So when you're starting conference play, I think that's tough, particularly for that cheetah position. What does OU do here if you've got going into this weekend? You don't have Justin Harrington. You may not have Reggie Pearson, which makes it tough because Peyton Bowen might be the guy you would slide in at either safety or cheetah. But now you don't have Reggie Pearson too. Are those injury concerns, or are those potential injuries, those potential inactive players, are those concerns at all?
I think Peyton Bowen puts a huge band-aid on a lot of that stuff just because he's been able to play that position so well. But I do think that if there was a good time to have when there's never a good time to have an injury, but if there's a good time to get Desan McCullough back, it's this week because Cincinnati's going to try and run the football. They have they run the pistol offense, so there's a lot of guys in the box. They're using H backs and tight ends to try and block and set up and using motions and things like that. So having a guy that's played football obviously is going to help. And McCullough did that last year as a true freshman and played really good football. But I think having somebody that's physical can help with the run. Having him back is going to be huge. You're going to miss Justin Harrington. He just when Brent Venables comes out in the preseason and says that somebody's going to be a star, like you take that to heart. He was going to have a special year, and whether he's out for just a couple more weeks or the remainder of the year, we don't know. But like you said, it doesn't sound good. But for now, having a guy like Desan McCullough back, having Peyton Bowen, and then obviously Reggie Pearson, having that depth at safety really helps you because it helps you kind of bring those guys down into that cheetah position for passing downs, and certainly I think you can make it work. So, in summation, it's not a good thing that you're missing Harrington, but it does appear that you have some depth there to make it work.
Yeah, and either way, I do think if this is a game OU should win, this is a prime opportunity in Big 12 play for young guys to get a lot of reps. If obviously Peyton Bowen, the most obvious example, but if maybe Samuel Basigo gets some time at Cheetah, if Josiah Wagner can come back, I bet we'll see a lot of him at safety. Guys like Makari Vickers, and even some other guys at linebacker we've seen like Kip Lewis and Kobe McKenzie. If everyone's having to shift around a little bit, what better opportunity for some real reps, like going on the road to Cincinnati, a place you're not very familiar with, to open conference play. I mean, that's about as high stakes as you could hope to have this early in the season for some young guys. So with that, Brian, we've touched on it a little bit here, but let's go ahead and move on to our next segment here called Saturday Synopsis. I like that one. I'm not saying you can't talk me out of it, but
that one sticks. I like that one too.
Okay. I'm glad. I'm glad we're on the same page there. Where we're going to preview a little bit of this OU Cincinnati game to kick off conference play. It's set Saturday at 11 a.m. It's going to be on Fox Sports. Fox Sports noon kickoff is going to be there. Should be pretty fun. Cincinnati's first conference game as a Big 12 member. All of it's pretty fun. I think OU is a 14.5-point favorite, which seems about right, but still you're going on the road. I don't think you can take anything for granted, but it's still the betting people are expecting OU to win pretty handedly. Brian, I'll pose this question to you. Give me the position group on offense you're looking at the most and the position group on defense you're looking at the most.
So I'm just gonna say the backfield. I'm gonna call it the backfield for the offense. That's because Emory Jones. So obviously he's your starter there at quarterback. He's a great athlete. He's bounced around. We saw him obviously play against Oklahoma as a youngster in the Cotton Bowl, and he looked good. Obviously young at that point, but he's a great athlete. He's got a great arm. He can really move for his size. He's 6'3" and can still move really well. But they've got a good group of running backs as well. Corey Kiner's a starter there. Ryan Montgomery had a really big game this last week against Miami, Ohio in the loss. But he looked good, and they've got some guys that they really trust back there with the football. So that's a really good group for them. And then obviously, I don't know where else you would look on the defensive side of the ball if you weren't looking at the defensive line. I think this is in the preseason. I'm on record as saying Cincinnati would have the best defensive line in the Big 12 and one of the top 10 in the country. And I still stand by that. Dante Corleone is, they call him the Godfather, and he lives up to it. He's a really, really impressive specimen for a defensive lineman.
That's just the coolest last
Yeah,
name
I
ever,
know,
isn't it?
right?
It's just
Yeah,
so cool.
love that.
Oh man.
So you've got him in the middle. You've got Jawan Briggs on the edge, and he's another fantastic guy. They've got some really good players. Malik Van recorded a sack, just really good film this last week. And so you've got some guys up front that can go. And I think that Oklahoma's offensive line is going to have the biggest test of its season thus far. Those guys can get after it. So be watching the backfield on the offense and be watching the defensive line on defense.
Yeah, I really like that. And I'll throw kind of to that point. I'm going to throw this at you. As Venables mentioned, it's going to be kind of a battle at the line of scrimmage. I mentioned this earlier. OU's been really good defending the run. Cincinnati's been really good running the ball. That seems like, to me, that's going to be the battleground of, can this OU rushing defense contain, as you mentioned, that backfield of Cincinnati? I mean, what do you expect? Is this a game where OU can further establishes itself as not only a vastly improved defense, but a really good rush defense as well? Or do you think this Cincinnati rushing offense can give them some problems?
I think he can give them some problems. Now, do I expect them to go for 240 yards? No, I don't. I think Oklahoma is much better equipped this year to take them on in that regard than they were this time last year. You've got the beef on the inside, on the interior to help. You've had really good play from the linebackers, and obviously your safeties are doing a good job playing the run and helping in that regard. So I think that, it's going to help, but I can't help but believe that at some point Emory Jones is going to have some sort of he's going to have some sort of impact in the running game. He just will. That's the kind of guy he is, and he's got really good vision when he's got the ball in his hands and makes the most of his carries. So I think that this is going to be a battle this is definitely going to be a battle of strength. And if Oklahoma goes into Cincinnati and holds them, say, under 100 yards for rushing, I mean, that would be impressive. You could really mail it home if that was the case. I do think you could say that Oklahoma's rush defense is very good. That's going to be tough, though, because Cincinnati loves to run the football.
This seems like it's got a Danny Stutzman like game. It just feels like a Danny Stutzman game. This feels like on the road at Cincinnati. You know what Cincinnati wants to do. They want to run the ball. Emory Jones wants to take off. I mean, he can throw the ball too, but he wants to take off and run. Obviously, the defensive line is going to be really important for OU too. But given the youth that OU may be relying on a little bit, this feels like a Danny Stutzman game. This feels like a come out, get 10 to 12 to 15 tackles, play a huge role in stopping the run. I mean, they're going to need a big game from Danny Stutzman every week, but I think, the defensive line, the OU defensive line and that Cincinnati offensive line are going to be battling back and forth. I think it's going to be someone like Danny Stutzman that's going to have to really be the difference maker. And then OU offensively, I mean, is it as simple as, well, give the ball to Dillon Gabriel and let him throw around on this Cincinnati secondary that struggled a little bit through weeks? Or maybe not double down, but do you say, hey, we need to get the run game going? Yeah, Cincinnati's a little bit better defending the run than they are the pass, but we need to get this run game going. We don't need to put everything in Dylan Gabriel's hands. What do you think? You've been studying the film, you've been looking at Cincinnati's defense. What do you think's the answer there?
So I expect Cincinnati to stack the box similarly to how SMU did and what Tulsa tried to do as well. But again, if you look at what happened last week, Cincinnati allowed receptions on 70% of Miami's pass attempts. They had 17 targets. They allowed 12 receptions. The number that jumps out at me and one that's probably got Andrew Anthony just licking his chops for this game is that Miami of Ohio averaged 19.8 yards per reception against Cincinnati last week. So
Ooh,
they were
that's a
hitting
big number.
yes, they're hitting big they were hitting big plays. And also they had 95 yards after the catch, which, Oklahoma had a really good number last week against Tulsa, but still it just begs the question, can Cincinnati run with those guys? I don't know. The very first offensive play of this game for Miami was a 79-yard touchdown. So again, I think there's going to be opportunities in the passing game, and it may be a thing where Oklahoma comes out throwing the football, and those safeties have to back off, and it opens up space in the running game. I mean, you know how this works just as well as I do. If you're balanced and you're able to do both things, that's how you're going to find success. So I think Oklahoma may use the pass to set up the run in this situation. I do expect them to open up things a little bit more in the running game. But obviously, when you got a guy that's completing almost 85% of his passes, you're going to let him throw the football.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's going to be interesting if we come into this weekend and it's clear that OU comes out to throw the ball a lot. That doesn't mean they're going to do that every single game, but I do think it will show a more willingness to air it out a little bit more than they showed last year. Now, the part of that is that you had Eric Gray, who had an incredible season. I think Dylan Gabriel's playing at a little bit of a better level this year than he was last year, but it should be interesting. And I think it's really good timing that, at Tulsa, you had Nick Anderson, Angelil Farouk, and Andrew Anthony all finished with over 100 yards. I think we could see something similar in this game, Brian, if they put the ball in Dylan Gabriel's hands. I just don't think Cincinnati has anybody to guard those three guys, especially, I mean, any of those three guys, but especially Nick Anderson. Guys like Nick Anderson, Jaden Gibson, they're so tall and lanky and athletic. I just don't think Cincinnati has anybody for those guys. Brian, all right, yeah, after having said all that, OU is a 14.5-point favorite. Give me your score prediction. Does OU cover? What's the final score?
I'm picking them to cover by half a point. I've got 38-23. I think the Sooners are going to not necessarily put on a scoring clinic, but I think that they're gonna go into Cincinnati and stand the test of time on the road, which they didn't do very well last year. They were 1-3 in true road games in Big 12 play last year. So I'm sure they've heard all about that, but I do expect Oklahoma to have success, and I expect them to cover ever so slightly. 38-23 Sooners.
I like 38-23. I'm a little similar. I think my final prediction when I write my main preview call or my main preview article on Friday is going to be 35-17 OU. That seems like it, but anywhere in that ballpark, high 30s to high teens, early 20s for Cincinnati. I think all that makes sense. But Brian, I think the reality of it too is the Big 12 is so weird right now. It's been so weird through 3 weeks. I mean, yeah, OU should win this game, but I think any win you can get in the Big 12 just based on the last 3 weeks is going to be huge. These are games, if you can stack up wins like this and get them in the bank, I think that's going to be big because, I mean, you look at the Big 12 standings right now, Brian, and I know you look at the whole Big 12 for the work you do with Heartland. Weird right now. You got 4 teams that are 1-2.
Yeah.
You've got 4 teams that are 2-1. Or actually, sorry, you've got 5 teams that are 2-1. Sorry, you got 5 teams that are 2-1. Brian, through 3 weeks, what's how are you seeing this Big 12 landscape shake out to you? And is the path more clear than it's ever been for OU to make a run to the conference title game?
Oh man. Um, as much as Big 12 fans don't want to hear it, the two teams right now that look like they're out ahead of everybody else by quite a wide margin are the two teams that aren't going to be in the Big 12 next year. It kind of feels like Oklahoma and Texas are on a collision course. Now, this is, we're 3 weeks in, so a lot can change. But BYU at 3-0, I still have my concerns. I don't, I'm not particularly impressed with Keaton Slovis outside of his freshman year at USC. I know that Jalen Daniels is going to keep Kansas scoring a lot of points as long as he can stay on the field, but their defense is atrocious. UCF, John Rice Plumlee's down. Don't know when he's going to come back. Timmy McClain looked really good for him last week, but um, you know, we'll just have to see on that one. And then you have this entire group of teams that you don't really know what to do with. I mean, did anybody expect Baylor to start the season 1-2? Did anybody expect Texas Tech to start the season 1-2? I mean, it's just been a weird thing. And then I look at this and I could say, Houston, a lot of people think is the worst team in the Big 12, but you could make the argument that Oklahoma State's the worst team in the Big 12. And you haven't been able to say that really since the beginning of the Gundy era.
Oklahoma State's been the second best team, most successful team in the Big 12 over the last 10 plus years. Correct. They just have been.
And what I saw from them last week, because I do watch all the other games whenever I get a chance, and they just didn't look like they even belonged on the field with South Alabama. And that's concerning. I mean, that's really concerning because South Alabama won 10 games last year. They had 18 starters back, but there is no world where they should beat Oklahoma State on their own field 33-7. So the Big 12 is wide open outside of those top two spots for me right now. I think Kansas State's going to work themselves into that conversation, but we'll just have to see how it goes. But I think it's OU Texas right now until further notice.
Well, and if last year taught OU fans anything, Brian, it's that you can't put the cart before the horse. And OU was 3-0 last year and then immediately lost their first three Big 12 games. But it does, I mean, the Big 12, the landscape just looked a little bit different last year than it did this year. And I think if you're an OU fan, you're saying, hey, let's just get through games like this weekend. Again, no disrespect to Cincinnati, but when you're a 15-point favorite, you have a chance to go get, a good win on the road with the way the landscape is. You just got to go do it. If you're OU, this is where the reality is. Again, not disrespecting Cincinnati, but if you're OU, you feel better. You feel confident that you're better on both sides of the ball than you were last year. You feel confident that you can go win a Big 12 title. You feel confident you can have momentum going into the SEC. Games like this weekend are games you should win and win pretty comfortably. I think that's the reality.
If you are truly a team that you feel can hang a banner, like Brent Venables has said a couple of times, you go win this game and you don't really leave much doubt. I think you should win by 14 or 15 points. So yeah, you've got to go win games like this if you're going to win a conference.
I agree. And with all that, Brian, that is going to put an end to the third episode of the Oklahoma Drill. Everybody out there knows they can catch us. You guys can catch us on our YouTube channel at OU Insider. You can catch Brian's writing. You can catch my writing. You can catch the great recruiting writing and inside information from Brandon Drum and Parker Thune over at ouinsider.com. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere you find your podcasts. Brian and I are going to be here releasing episodes every Thursday to talk about all things OU. So again, everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Oklahoma Drill, and we'll see you here next week.